Welcome back to The Run. We're talking immigration reform. Here on The Run, we're going to take the nearly unprecedented step of asking, what do immigration questions mean to those on the other side of the border? Of course, that's the border with Mexico. According to the Census Bureau, Mexicans account for 28% of all U.S. immigrants, legal and illegal. That's up from about 16% in 1980 and barely 5% in 1960. Plenty of debate about what that means for the U.S. What does it mean for Mexico? Anders?
Well, Mexicans are watching the debate very closely on immigration. About 3% of Mexico's GDP is actually based on remittances from the United States, from immigrants to the United States. So
not trade with, actual just cash.
Actual remittances from the country. And so there's a lot of support for immigration reform in Mexico, for reform in the United States. Mexicans typically see in Mexico see Obama and the Democrats as very pro-immigration. They're highly supportive of Obama and the Democrats. If you read the Mexican newspapers, they're highly critical of Republicans on their immigration, their attempts to forestall immigration further. So it's a very, very closely watched debate in Mexico. I think that Hillary Clinton by throwing down the gauntlet with her recent speech, it's a very advantageous speech for her and for the Democratic Party going into the future, because as the Hispanic vote increases in the United States, the Democrats will be optimally placed to take advantage of that. Republicans, by having, Jeb Bush having a Latina wife, is not really going to cut it as far as getting the Hispanic vote into the future. Having actual policy that really supports Hispanic people in the United States and Hispanic immigrants will win the day in the future. So this is not a policy change just for the next 4 or 8 years, but for the next 2 decades.
Right. Now, go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to say something that a lot of people may not know, which is that there has actually not been net immigration from Mexico since about 2008, basically when the financial crisis hit.
The economic cycle, sure.
Yeah, and in fact, the Latin immigration into the United States over the last 7 years has been from other Central American countries, the Caribbean and South America, particularly from Central America. And in fact, there are certain indicators which might suggest that in the future, we are not going to see heavy immigration from Mexico. Historically, countries which have high rates of emigration tend to be countries with high birth rates, and Mexico no longer has a high birth rate.
Well, with NAFTA, the jobs are going to Mexico, right? So the people don't need to come here, the jobs are going there.
But they're also losing a lot of their traditional jobs and ways of earning a living. But the fact that I was going to mention that the net rate of immigration from Mexico has fallen deeply is the proof that they're coming here for jobs, that they're coming here for money, that they're not coming here to change our culture and to take over, and that they are sending their money back home. Because I think most immigrants would prefer to remain in their home countries if they could, if conditions allowed it, if they could earn a living, if there wasn't violence. That's why people come.
Well, migration is a natural part of
and
world history. I mean, it's a
early
very
20th
natural
century,
thing for
there were
people
no
to
laws.
move
You could
to
just come and go as you
countries
felt
where
like, so.
there's better jobs and there's better economy. So it's not surprising that people want to move.
It's also an argument, by the way, for getting rid of any remaining trade barriers between Mexico and the U.S. When goods don't cross borders, immigrants will. If you can do as much business as you want back in your home country, there isn't as much of an incentive to go elsewhere. And I should also say, on a similar note, that while we can criticize politicians, including Obama, for the way they implement changes in immigration, I don't criticize the illegal immigrants themselves. I mean, specific ones who are committing crimes or whatever are fine, criticize them the same way you would anyone else. But the desire to sneak into the country and thwart its immigration laws, that's fine with me. I mean, virtually all laws are unjust anyway. And a lot of the Republicans who say, oh, well, if we poo-poo this, we're basically saying lawbreakers can enter the country. But I bet a lot of those same Republicans would be okay with people thwarting environmental laws they didn't like or gun laws they didn't like. So I'm in favor of lawbreakers in general, as long as you're not committing assault, theft, or fraud. Let them come in. And it is in a sense, unfair to those who have waited years for green cards and played by the rules, but that's because those rules are stupid. Don't fault the people who managed to get around them. Just as I would never fault someone who managed to evade the draft during a war, it's the draft that is stupid, not the people who find a way around it.
Also, one of the things that Hillary said when she was a New York State Senator, which is true as well, is that many illegal immigrants, or they're not illegal human beings, they are people who are here illegally, paid more in taxes in New York State than the corporations did in New York State. So that's another issue when we want to question whether she's genuine in her sentiment. She was stopped from saying that, as with the driver's licenses, because she was gearing up for the 2008 presidential run. So they were trying to protect her. So it's another reason why I tend to believe that a lot of what she's saying is heartfelt. She believes that young children who come here at the border should be given more legal help, and that they should not be incarcerated. She also criticized the privatizing of prisons that are holding detainees, and that, exactly what I said on another issue of the fact that there's a guaranteed number of beds to these private contractors, and so you've got families and kids and children in just horrific conditions.
But she's also said that they should be sent back. Now, she's changed that position.
I don't know if she said that about children. She's saying they should be given more legal help to determine whether they can stay.
After she said that
right.
she said that they should be sent back, and then she clarified the position very quickly, to her credit, to say that if they did not have family in the United States or a legitimate claim on asylum. But and then she went on to join many others, including some on the right, who criticized the conditions under which people were being detained of all ages, which were just deplorable. Anybody who visited the detention facilities on the border changed their mind very quickly.
Hillary Clinton has had a long history of supporting diversity, immigrant rights, racial
Women and
diversity.
children.
I think her heart is in that place. I think there is no question that.
I think it's ridiculous to claim she has a heart, but
Rand Paul does.
Her
okay.
history is more complex.
This is getting away from the specific positions of the different candidates, which are fascinatingly varied. I mean, for instance, Mike Huckabee, surprisingly perhaps, is someone who's shown a pretty moderate position on immigration issues and immigration reform issues. I mean, for instance, he's supported scholarships for illegal aliens. But I wanted to address Mr. Seavy's very idealistic, view of open borders. There are a lot of reasons not to have open borders. You know, historically, the U.S. has had periods of immigration followed by periods of assimilation. We've had no period of assimilation following a huge wave of immigration. That itself probably is worth examining. But there's also a further issue, which is, Melody said, well, you know, we didn't have any rules. We didn't have any rules about national origin at the beginning of the 20th century. But we had detailed rules about, for instance, whether you had tuberculosis. I mean, there was an involved process, even about your IQ. Yeah. There involved process of becoming an American. But to get to even a further point, you know, look, open borders is something that's very bad at a time of rising income inequality for low-skill workers. And I think we have to look at that too. If we're going to have immigration at any level, don't we want to focus on immigration of higher-skilled workers at a time of increasing income inequality?
Ask Alabama.
But if you're worried about
equality,
you should also be worried about cross-border equality, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got the biggest inequalities in the world are cross-border. They're not within countries. So if you're really truly worried about equality, you should be concerned about cross-border equality.
But income inequality is, for instance, one of the things that not income inequality, but immigration is one of the things that really had a damaging effect on labor unions and construction trades. That was the thing that really broke up the construction unions.
Right.
Well, but it also increased. I mean, you and I, as people who have critical views of unions, might think of this as primarily positive.
Yes.
But from the point of view of income inequality, it's a serious issue.
Or day laborers who then weren't paid. You know, so that you would rather have people being picked up on a street corner to be used in a construction project and then being dumped somewhere without pay than have a union.
But it improves equality cross-border.
I'm entirely against it.
It improves equality cross-border, right? To have people from very low-income countries move to very high-income.
I live in the United States. Oh, one other point about Mexico. Mexico's own laws with respect to immigration to Mexico are actually very punitive, which very few people point out. You can be arrested and thrown in jail almost summarily. I mean, they have very, very punitive laws. They're in favor of liberalizing our laws so that Mexicans can come to the United States. But if you're an American who goes to Mexico, you face a lot of harassment, detention, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, but you say you're an American, right? And But so you're using the
you mean that
equality
goes to Mexico
argument.
illegally?
Well, you're using the equality argument purely strategically for your purposes, not because you actually believe in equality. When you say, "Oh, I'm an American,"
Very
so
few-
I'm only for equality in the U.S.
You would be very
the
hard
hell
pressed.
with the rest of them.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a developed, wealthy country that gets this right. And I'd welcome any example that we find. But look at what Germany has done. They have the Gastarbeiter program, the guest worker program, largely Turkish, who come through. They work, they go back, and
But that has a
they're
terrible
monitored.
history. You can't
Well,
measure
that's
that
the thing. That's
by
the point.
no, but you can't
Yeah.
measure that by what they do today. But also, Germany had, obviously, to keep those guest workers out. This is early in the mid 20th century. That your grandfather had to have been a German citizen in order to be able to even apply
Mm-hmm,
for citizenship. So of course, anybody that came from Turkey couldn't meet that criteria. So they were falsely engineered.
It's
I
not
think
just Germany,
Denmark
though. Mm-hmm.
has done actually an excellent job with their immigration policies. But it's easy for Denmark because they are a rather large country and a small population and prosperous and,
You
and
mean Denmark.
homogeneous. I do mean Denmark.
A large country? You're including
Large in the
Greenland?
sense of
Geographic.
geographic.
Relative
Maybe
to
you're-
population.
Relative to their population, they had room for
But
them.
their borders
Denmark
are
is
also
a
very
tiny
far
country,
from.
unless you're including Greenland.
No, well, most of the countries that are.
They also
Denmark is,
actually have a
they're
lot-
not a tiny, they're
They've
not
also had-
Switzerland, right?
They've also had a lot of.
and they had a good
But
economy. They had
Denmark's
very
borders-
liberal laws.
They've had huge problems with immigration.
Now they have, but
Yeah.
originally they did not.
I think the
For a long
ideal,
time they
though,
did.
is you want to get back to the 19th century when basically passports didn't even exist and people could roam the earth at will. Nation states are a fiction. Human individuals are not. You want them to be able to go wherever they want to work and do business.
Schengen is working very well in Europe, right?
In
I
19
mean,
Well, what
in
is
the
working
19th
very well?
Schengen. That's the anyone can move around in
Yeah.
Europe.
Oh,
and
within
the
Europe.
EU.
Okay,
you
well,
know?
but they've got a population
And they
roughly
like that.
equivalent
And also
to ours,
you
an
don't
economy
see-
the size of ours,
Right.
a homogeneity that's
Right.
comparable to ours in
Well,
total.
There's a lot of difference. I mean, there's a lot of difference, right?
And still, look
Greeks,
at the problems in
Germans,
France with the
Swedes,
Bandu. I mean,
French.
really, the question is, what kind of history does a country have? And Denmark does not border a country whose population is significantly different, like visibly, discernibly different from its native population historically. And then you look at France, who has the history with Algeria. And
That's the
then now they have
fault
the
of
Bandu, which is
colonialism,
very-
and it's the same in England, right?
very
Happy
true.
to
That's
go
exactly
around
the
the world
point.
and say,
Exactly
oh, now
the
you're a
point.
member of the British Empire, now you're a member of the French Empire, but God forbid you ever come to our shores.
Well,
and ask for
initially they
anything.
tried
So
to
that these
open
populations
it
that
up.
are-
Initially
right.
they did.
But
The
they,
British
but they were
Empire opened
always
it up.
second-class citizens. They never expected they would lose their empire. They never expected these people would show up on their doorstep. So when they actually did, and they
Well,
are
they
all
did.
by
They let
and
'em
large
in.
brown and black
They
people,
encouraged that.
they
That
would
was the
all have
original.
been treated as second-class citizens. Even Israel. Right, right of return for everybody, unless you're black from Ethiopia.
That's not
now
true.
we have
That's
to
not
now.
true.
Melody, that's completely
It
false.
is
That's
becoming harder and harder.
that's
It's all in the
only-
news.
No,
It's
no, no.
all
This
in
is
the
actually
news.
this is actually a libel. Not only did Israel bring the Falashas in, they actually
They're not bringing them now.
They essentially invaded Ethiopia and brought in airplanes to take out
It's
more than
all over the
50,000
news.
people.
There was just a big protest, and the Ethiopians that are still the Jewish Ethiopians in
Yeah,
Ethiopia
Falasha.
right now have to go through many hoops that the earlier immigrants did not have to. The ones that were saved, and they are complaining. There was a big march that they're being treated as second. There's on video
But I'm
an
trying-
Ethiopian Jewish soldier attacked by a white Jewish cop. Right, so this is, and now stories, and you read about it coming out.
No, but the specific
So
claim you
I
made that
think
they
we
did not
also
welcome
just cannot. My
the
point
spirit-
being that
yeah.
we cannot ignore the inherent racism that's involved in so many of these immigration questions, regardless of whether it's at our shores or anybody else's. And I'm sure in Mexico, some part of their ruling on the illegal immigration is that they're worried about what's coming from the South, just as we are, right? That even though they're all brown people to some degree, the Mexican culture and what people, who's considered to be better than everybody else.
But also
and
that
the other-
racism can fade over time. So the Irish in the United States used to really, the
It's
the
not really
black
racism.
Irish, right?
That's ethnic.
But now
I mean, the
that's
Irish
changed.
people are white people,
And I
so,
think you
you know.
see that change
No,
they're
they
not
face
brown.
in other
tremendous- yeah, they
ethnicities
face
too.
tremendous
But they're
oppression.
The
white.
Japanese now it's changed in the United States.
One neat
Our
remi-
attitude towards the Japanese.
One neat
there's a very
reminder
small-
that markets are saner than nations is that when one of the Facebook founders, who is an immigrant, renounced his American citizenship to try to escape high taxes, the nasty and very personal a reaction of embarrassing New York Senator Chuck Schumer was to put forward legislation that would bar that guy from ever even visiting the U.S. again. To which I can only say, I hope Facebook lives longer than the U.S. government does, and there's a good chance that will be the case. Ideally, nation states should dissolve like ice cubes in a bath of boiling water that is international commerce and free immigration.
No other country has gotten it right. We've got a lot of work to do here within our own borders. We'll be right back with a radical approach from Rand Paul, next on The Run.